Hello dear students, today we will discuss the topic early agriculture and environment. We will mainly focus on the transformation of hunter-gatherer societies that begin to cultivate cereals and took to other associated developments in agriculture, and the characteristic features, how the Neolithic revolution and related evidence along with the patterns of agriculture in West Asia and the Indian subcontinent have changed it. Dear students, the beginning of agriculture considered to be an momentous event in the nature-human interface that's generally associated with Neolithic revolution. The ground stone artifacts of this period that were well-rounded and had smooth long edges made the cultivation of soil an easier process. Once man took to agriculture, several very significant changes followed that may be legitimately called as hurling, the beginning of a new phase in man's relationship with environment. Human dependence on the resource of nature for survival ended. The production of cereals like barley, wheat and rice allowed them to grow their own food. They also began to domesticate some species of animals, both for supplies of milk and meat as well as for the harnessing their labor for various purposes. This was a completely new relationship with the environment and its resources. The changes introduced in the stone artifacts that made smooth surfaces and well-rounded and symmetrical shapes possible were of such far-reaching consequences that they were termed as ringing a remarkable shift in the stage of human evolution. One scientist, V. Jordan Chaldi, noted that the impact of the new stone tools and artifacts on human life was of enormous significance. Chaldi argued that once Neolithic tools begin to be made, they would in turn make it easier to cultivate the soil. This would come about when humans, probably women, discovered that they might not confine themselves to collecting wild grains, but increase their food supply by themselves putting seeds in the ground. Ground stone axes would help cut trees to clear the ground much better than the earlier rough tools, and with the sharp stone tips of digging sticks as primitive hoes, the ground could be better softened to take in the seed. As cultivation became more widespread, domestication of cattle would be put on a firmer foundation. Stubble on the fallows would be available as fodder for cattle, which would supply both milk and meat and so help to reduce dependence on hunting. Settled agriculture communities inhabiting villages could now arise. These communities would in time be able to produce a surplus, that is, grow more food than the producers themselves required for their bare subsistence. Non-producers establishing their right by force, the right in time confirmed by cult and custom, could then also appropriate such surplus. Classes, private property and state now made their appearances based on such expropriation of the surplus. The domestication of plants and animals, a characteristic feature of the Neolithic stage of culture, set on a course a self-sufficient food-producing economy. The inhabitants obtained assured supply of food through cultivation of cereals, and they also began the practice of domesticating animals. Dear students, the beginning of agriculture, as we have said earlier, had demarcated a definite shift in human relationship with the environment. As a matter of fact, a marked change had taken place in the environmental conditions obtaining in the part of the world with which we are concerned. A perspicuous description given by the Bridget and Allechin explains these circumstances. They write, at the end of the Pleistocene, that's approximately 10,000 years ago, climatic conditions more or less similar to those of today were established in West and South Asia. This provided the setting for man to make a number of important advances in his control of the environment and set in train a series of events which led ultimately to the appearance of the first urban societies in both regions some 6,000 years ago. Perhaps the most fundamental advances were the domestication of several breeds of animals and plants. Clearly, conducive environmental conditions and availability of necessary material support through Neolithic revolution helped the practice of agriculture to germinate and allowed it to take roots. Dear students, in this region, agriculture first began in West Asia and from there it spilled over into South Asia. The evidence available today suggests that the people of Syria and Palestine were the first to practice agriculture. They were known as Natufians after a campus site in the Wadiul Natuf in Jordan and used sickles of small flint blades set with gum into the grooved shafts of the bone. Surely, the agriculture techniques from West Asia had diffused over Afghanistan from where they had to cross over into the Indus system. As a result of a complex interplay of sedimentary societies with their environment, new social and economic structures emerged. It may well be that this interest gave rise to some of the most important new concepts in the whole of region, namely belief in an afterlife, in resurrection after death, and belief in the transmigration of souls and the cycle of rebirth. Throughout the length and breadth of India, there are found today at the folk level rites and festivals which are intimately associated with the changing seasons, the sowing and harvesting of crops and breeding of cattle and other livestock. There can be no doubt that a very large part of this modern folk region is extremely ancient and contains the traits which originated during the earliest periods of stock raising and agriculture settlement. Also associated with permanent settlement were a series of new crafts involving important technological discoveries. Among these were the manufacture and use of pottery, in time to become ubiquitous as a trace of human occupation, and the discovery of the smelting of copper and its alloys, and their use in manufacture of tools and weapons. The regional, cultural and chronological variations are in types of artifacts made from blades and flakes and in their relative proportions. All assemblage at this stage are varied and clearly intended to serve many purposes. Now, dear students, we will be talking about regional distribution in the agriculture. The successful exploitation or domestication of several species of wild plants and consequent rise of sedentary settlements were processes that showed multiple patterning over such a large geographical area as South Asia. Moreover, climatic divergence and similar differences over physical environment were supportive factors of such a patterning. Different plants and resultant crops found favor in different regions. The early agriculture of the region South Asia can be divided into several sub-regions, each showing some variation from others. First, Balochistan. Balochistan forms the border region with the Indus system. The spillover of the agriculture from West Asia via Afghanistan had taken place in this region before it reached the Indus system. The environmental conditions obtaining in this region are therefore of interest to us, as that is likely to explain in the emergence of agriculture there. As we have mentioned, Brigid and Elgin reported that the climate is one of the extremes, the summer temperatures being very high and the winters often very cold, with snow lying for up to 2 months in the higher valleys. Given these climatic conditions, the choice of habitation for the communities of the Neolithic period must have depended primarily upon their suitability for varying pastoral and agriculture requirements. As the rainfall is generally less than 10 inches per annum, mainly falling in the winter months, water for men and animals was obviously a prime necessity in site location. Because of the scarcity of water, settlements were never large unless they coincided with a good permanent spring or source of water. This scarcity also set strict limits upon the production of crops. Consequently, a pastoral element in the economy has predominated and has certainly been well represented up until the present day. There are signs that in Balochistan, in prehistoric times, attempts were made to retain rainwater in surface drainage tanks behind earth or stone embankments. The two major sites of interest to us in this region are Kili Gul Muhammad and Mundi Gak. Kili Gul Muhammad has yielded evidence relating to domestication of cattle, sheep, goat and ox, and of mud brick houses suggesting sedentary way of life. Mundi Gak, another site, also provides evidence of permanent settlement. Initially, the houses were like oblong cells made of pressed earth, but subsequently larger houses began to appear. They were made up of sun-dried bricks and had more than one enclosed living room. The organized agriculture and the associated permanent settlements had become a conspicuous feature of Balochistan region. These developments could serve as a precursor to the beginning of agriculture in the Indus system. Now, the Indus system. Bridget and Elchin have graphically described the environmental conditions of the Indus system and offer a very different environment from the upland villages of Balochistan. The depiction that we see today, even despite modern flood control measures of a highly unstable river constantly changing its course within a wide floodplain and laying down quantities of a silt in the course of annual inundation or large areas of plain. That was probably the same in many respects at the time of the earliest settlements on the edge of the plain. Dear students, the rate of accumulation of silt throughout the period has been such that not only must many features of the valley have become submerged along with any early sites associated with them, but the plain itself must have expanded in area, increasing the extent of highly fertile alluvial soil. The main channel of the Indus flows through a wide alluvial flood plain that, with the recession of the annual inundation of June to September, is of great fertility. Wheat and barley sown at that time ripened by the following spring without either ploughing or manuring of the ground. Dear students, the banks of the river and its subsidiary channels are not cultivated and must then, as now, have supported a dense gallery forest. These forests were until recent times rich in game and must have provided attractive hunting grounds. So too must the plains beyond the active floodplain, for they would have produced a rich and varied grassland vegetation and have provided grazing for wild no less than for domestic animals. Once the agricultural potentials of the new alluvium were realized and means were discovered of the overcoming the problems of protecting settlements on the floodplain from inundation, an entirely new type of life became possible. On present showing, this development took place in several stages, reaching its culmination around the opening of the 3rd millennium BC. It is clear from this description that the peculiar behavior of the rivers in this region helped agriculture to grow and take roots. This area has yielded rich evidence of early agriculture through a fairly well excavated site known as Mehergarh. Mehergarh is located on the banks of Bolan river at a distance of approximately 150 kilometers from the Quetta Valley. The excavated site shows 3 different stages of settlement, all of which may be termed as Neolithic settlements. The presence of agriculture, as stated by Irfan Habib, is confirmed by the finds of seeds, the bulk area of naked 6-row barley, the other subspecies of barley like Hewlett 6-row and 2-row, and of wheat like Yincorn, Emmer and Hard, that was species of the wheat, are present in small amounts. Dear students, agriculture seems to have given an impetus to animal domestication. Goats were already domesticated, and the humped ox and sheep began to be tamed and bred from captured wild stock. The other evidence pertaining to agriculture and therefore of significance to us is the appearance of mud brick structures of growing size as we move from the earlier stage to a lateral stage supposedly used as granaries. Clearly, otherwise arid zone harbored agriculture due to environmental conditions made available by alluvial carrying rivers. Now, dear students, we will be talking about northern valleys. Evidence of early agriculture in this region is best reported from the Kashmir area. There are two principal sites in Kashmir that give us useful material evidence on early agriculture. From Burzuhom, close to Srinagar, we get information about pit dwelling inhabitants. The walls of these dwellings, as also their floors, were sometimes plastered with mud. There are also some deeper pits that were probably reached through steps. It is, however, significant that direct evidence for the agriculture in Burzuhom has not been available. The other site from where such evidence has been unearthed is at Gufkral. It is suggested that they grew wheat, barley and lentils. Domestication of sheep and goats is also reported. As suggested by Bridged and Elchin, the Kashmir Valley culture appears as a local adaptation to the special environment of the mountains, its people having rich sources of food from hunting and from agriculture. Now, dear students, we will be talking about the east regions of Indus area. The region east of the Indus area is different from the Indus area environmentally, as it has been a region of high monsoon rainfall. The Mesolithic settlements have been present in this region from a very early time, and the beginning of the agriculture has in many cases been in continuation of this culture. There are two main sites at Koldeva and Mahagar, which yield interesting evidence on early agriculture. The habitation at these sites were in circular huts that were raised on wooden posts. The most significant find are husks of rice, indicating that this probably was the earliest rice growing culture. The wet environmental conditions resulting from the monsoon were probably a prime reason for rice cultivation. Dear students, another site of significance is Chirand, located in Bihar on the plains of river Ganga. Bridged and Elchin have assessed this site for its closing period as contemporary with the late Harappan. The occupants living in huts made of bamboo and strengthened with mud plaster. Evidence for rice cultivation in the form of rice husks has become available from this site. Since fish bones have also been found along with rice husks, it may be assumed that the rice and fish formed a main food item the inhabitants. Now, dear students, the peninsular India. The evidence for early agriculture in this part of the country comes mainly from sites excavated in the Karnataka region. These sites are commonly known as ash mounds and are located at Utnur, Kubgal, Kodikal and Pallavi. It is suggested that no outside influence worked in the development of these sites, and they had an impulse of their own in developing a Neolithic culture. The predominant physical features are residual granite hills rising from a rolling sea of black cotton soil. The hills were favored for settlement, and wherever they contained suitable caves or rock shelters, these were used for habitation and often enlarged by the construction of leveled stone terrace in front. Interestingly, the ash mound sites have been found to be contemporary with the early phase of Harappan culture. The most notable feature here is the existence of cattle pens, where domesticated cattle like sheep and goats were kept penned together. These pens were surrounded by two heavy stockades of palm trunks. The inner of the two provided the area in which the cattle were penned, while the outer provided a space within which herdsmen lived. Dear students, the evidence deliberated so far leads us to form a certain view about early agriculture in India. The environmental conditions had become favorable at a time about 10,000 years in the past from now. Agriculture originated in West Asia and from there travelled a route that passed through northern Afghanistan, the Indus system, the northern valleys to the central and eastern parts of India. Sedentary settlements came into being as mud brick houses began to build. Domestication of cattle was practiced and early agriculture had begun. Sheep and goats became the early domesticated animals, and wheat and barley were cultivated as cereal crops. As we move to the eastern India, we found the beginning of rice culture. The local environmental conditions had made their impact as a variety of evidence from the sites separate from Balochistan to Chiran in Bihar verily testify this feature. Dear students, with this we conclude today's lecture. Hope you have understood well. Thank you.